So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for sticking for the last panel. It's going to be a great conversation. And I'm really excited about the topic, which is all about moving at the pace of culture. You know, at our work at Soda, we see firsthand every single day just how quickly trends are moving today, but also the opportunity for brands and for companies if they can identify them quickly and connect to those key cultural moments. And I have some really amazing panelists to talk. Are we doing a selfie right now? Things are happening in the now, which I'll introduce to you. You may know some of them already. So starting over here on my right is Paul Burns. And Paul is the managing director at Twitter Canada. And prior to joining Twitter, Paul spent over a decade in the Canadian media and tech industries, including senior roles at Shaw Communications and CanWest Global. Paul was also Canada's first managing director for Huge, which is a full-service digital agency out of Brooklyn, New York. Next to Paul is X, and if you don't know him, he is one of Canada's most iconic directors. He's worked with artists such as Drake, Rihanna, Jay-Z, Kanye West, Usher, John Mayer, the list goes on and on. He also owns Pop Rock, which is a production company that specializes in popular culture storytelling. And if that's not enough, he's also the founder of Operation Prefrontal Cortex, which is an incredible program all about harnessing the power of mindfulness and meditation to help reduce the incidence of gun and mass violence in Toronto. To my left is David Allard. David is the Chief Marketing Officer at Samsung, and his experience encompasses over 17 years of marketing leadership across integrated marketing, brand management, media innovation, sponsorship marketing, and content strategy, both in Canada and globally. And prior to joining Samsung, David worked extensively on tier one brands at Coca-Cola, Diageo, Campbell's Soup, and Unilever. And last but not least, we have Chris Leacock. Many of you may know him as Jillionaire. He's both a cultural collaborator as well as an entrepreneur. As a DJ, music producer, and member of the group Major Lazer, Chris has toured all over the world and has worked with artists from Justin Bieber to Nicki Minaj. And he also owns Brooklyn-based label Feel Up Records. But again, man of many hats, Chris re-entered the tech space recently, and he's been busy touring all over the last 2 years, speaking about the intersection of technology and culture, and how the tech industry can create tools and support systems for creatives. He's also partnered with the Berlin-based team of artists, developers, and scientists to work together on Endel, which is a mobile app that generates real-time, personalized sound environments to enhance focus, relaxation, and sleep. So lots of different things up here, which will make the conversation interesting. And so please join me in giving the panelists a warm welcome. Okay, so maybe where we'll start is just around, you know, what is cultural relevance? It feels like maybe it's the latest marketing buzzword. You know, years ago in marketing, people used to talk about differentiation, and that was the main focus to stand out in the market. But many creatives, many marketers today are talking about cultural relevance as one of the key ways that you need to connect with consumers. So, you know, is it different, differentiation and cultural relevance, you know, and why is it important?
So maybe I'll kick it off. First of all, I want to apologize for not getting the footwear brief right. Clearly, I'll step up my game next time. You know, the term cultural relevance is an interesting one because, you know, from my perspective, I think, you know, great marketing has always been about insight, right? And really understanding consumers and their lives and trying to find the intersection between a brand and their lives and their passion points as well. I think what's changed a little bit is you know, the media landscape has changed, the channels that we activate have changed. You know, we see numbers like, you know, only 30% of brand awareness is driven by pure advertising. And so, you know, I think now more than ever, it's really critical that brands and marketers get to know their consumers from a cultural perspective. What are the passion points they're interested in? And find that intersection between a brand purpose and credible activation within that passion point space. So that's kind of what we're trying to do at Samsung specifically.
And I guess, Paul, sorry, jump in.
Do you want to?
Yeah,
yes.
sure.
So to me, and I think Twitter, cultural relevance is what is happening right now. And, you know, for us, We see things happening every second of every day. And I think the opportunity for a marketer or for a brand is or the challenge maybe is also, how do you authentically weave a story around what's happening right now in a way that's actually relevant to your brand? So, and I think, the big insight that I think we've seen is most people don't give a shit. 77%, I saw a stat the other day, 77% of brands could disappear tomorrow and no one would care. And so I think for a brand and for a marketer and, anyone who's trying to be relevant and mean something, you really have a challenge in front of you. How do you actually matter to people? And when you connect to the things that matter to people, you as a brand begin to matter. So I think that would be sort of a quick POV.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about authenticity, and I think we've seen so many brands that try to do this and they just fail. It doesn't feel authentic. I think consumers can sniff it out. On the flip side, I was reading today, Nike had their earnings results come out on Tuesday, and Wednesday they had the greatest day for their stock price ever. And part of the analysts were saying they think a lot of that had to do with the risks they were taking, the Kaepernick campaign, and how they really stood out in a way that was authentic. But they also had a lot of blowback for that as well. And corporate culture isn't really conducive to risk taking, but it seems like the brands that are doing that well are willing to take a stand for something. And I just what do you think about that and the risk taking and doing it authentically?
I think you need to. It's hard for, like you said, it's hard for some brands to really know. All right, let's take a risk and let's go for it. But that, at the same time, is really how these things work. If you overcalculate, it doesn't work. I mean, I was talking about this. I think something we need to remember is knowing your place, being very honest about your brand in the marketplace and where you stand. One of the books, it's a Bible for me. When I started really understanding advertising and studying it, I read a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. All right? Did anyone know that book? A few of you know because I gave it to you. What's it called? Hong Shing. Anyone know Hong Shing? You're not from Toronto if you haven't eaten at Hong Shing. Hong Shing, Dundas, best Chinese food in town. Trust me. But I told him the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing is this book that really breaks down, I call it the jazz level of advertising, where how do people understand brands? And one of the things he said in there is you need to know if you're number one or you're number two or you're number three. You need to know that and then market from that position. And the other night I was saying to a friend, a guy trying to pick up a girl, a 6'5" guy doesn't have the same as a 5'8" guy. You know what I'm saying? No, you need to know your height. The women are like, yeah. It's just a very, it's just a different, we know it's just a different deal. And in fact, if you switch the game, if you gave, and let's just say they both have game, but the 5'8" game ain't the same as the 6'5" game. And if you were to switch it, that's weird. You feel what I'm saying? Like that doesn't, what's up with this approach? It's a different thing. And brands need to understand that. I get where it's not like everyday life. It's not, you don't fake it till you make it because the audience knows you're not, Pepsi can't pretend to be Coke. Because, and again, it's in the book. The people look at you, it's like saying, I'm the best rapper in Toronto. But then go, but you're not. The best rapper is Drake. If you were the best, then why aren't you Drake? And then you actually lose points in people's minds. It's really, I think it's very important to have an understanding of where your brand is, how people behave and reacting with those brands, and then move accordingly.
So from your perspective, what are some examples of brands that are doing that well today?
Examples of brands that are doing that well?
Yeah, really connecting to culture authentically.
I think you brought up the best one in the market right now. I think that Nike's doing a really good job. Just to expand on what X was saying previously, I look at something that I think of as the 3 A's, which is accountability, authority, and I forgot what the third one was. I'm playing. But no, but the reality of it is that I think that the challenge that a lot of brands face for a very long time is that they were just going to people and like, oh, like this guy's, he has reach, And I remember having a conversation at Fast Company a couple of years back and asked the people in the audience by show of hands who would prefer scale over influence, and people always say scale. And the thing about it is that you can grow scale either organically or with a bot. You know, you can fake scale, but you can't fake reach. You know, you can't fake impact. And the thing about it is that, you know, if the first thing that you have to do is be authentic, which is the first A, and then you have to have authority on what you're talking about, which is the second one, and then you have to be accountable. You know, both as a representative of the product and as a brand. And I think that that's what happened with the Kaepernick issue. Yeah, they received a lot of blowback, but you know what? While they were getting that blowback, their stock price went up. You know, and their stock prices continued to rise throughout the whole debacle, you know, because they were able to find somebody who was authentic and somebody who had authority in the conversation. Because a lot of times you pick people who, yeah, they might be authentic, but they might necessarily have authority to talk about it, you know, like you can't just go like, oh, like, this guy's authentic, let's have him talk about, you know, buying cars, you know, and X might be like, yo, like, I don't drive, and I'm trying to get people to, you know, be more careful with the environment. I'm not really interested in, you know, selling cars. So he might be authentic, but he might necessarily have authority on the subject. And then you might have authority on the subject, but then you don't want to be accountable for what you said or any repercussions associated with it. So like if you don't really line those three things up, then it becomes difficult for the audience to look at that and go, all right, cool, yeah, this is a brand that I can get behind, you know, because the challenge that we face is that we have to tell the stories of those brands because we have our audience, you know, we have that scale, we have that reach, we have that impact, you know, and in some cases we may rely on the brand scale to say, can you help us tell that story, you know? And I've worked with Nike before and worked with Samsung before and Twitter and so many of these bigger brands, you know, whether they are in the social media space or in the product space. And it becomes challenging because at some point along the line, you know, somebody's like, well, okay, well, you have to say this. And it's like, well, I can't really say that because these people are going to know I didn't write that, you know. So it's challenging a lot of times to say, hey, who's doing a really good job? I think, for instance, like you look at Matthew McConaughey driving around in a Cadillac with no shirt on, and you think, oh, those guys are doing a really good job because Matthew McConaughey probably appeals to the audience of, you know, 30-something-year-old men who want to drive around with no shirt on in a Cadillac, you know. So it's just about finding the right fit.
I mean, the two things I think that you mentioned there for me that I think really resonate are, you know, just really understanding your brand purpose, you know, in an authentic way, and then finding the partnerships that, you know, can work within that brand purpose. You know, like for Samsung, our purpose is about, you know, human-driven innovation that defies barriers. And when I look at like the Power Up campaign we're running with Directs, I mean, we had a real intersection of purpose in his credibility as, you know, one of Canada's most prolific directors and what he's trying to push, and our brand purpose around, you know, doing what you can't and pushing and defying those barriers as well. So I think, you know, it's got to be authentic, and you got to stay true to that purpose, and you need to find the partners that have the insight and also the impact to accomplish what you need to do.
I would just say that we ran a study recently on like what drives someone to purchase something. Why do people purchase products, and what are the motivations behind making any type of purchase, irrespective of category. Almost half of the reasons why you make a purchase, most people make a purchase, is based on price. But price is in many ways driven by supply and demand and market forces. But a quarter is driven by brand reputation. But brand reputation, you know, that can take years to change and develop. But another quarter the reason why someone would make a purchase is driven by cultural relevance. And that was a really interesting finding for us. And what's amazing about that is cultural relevance can actually be changed with one campaign, with one market activation. You can actually begin to flip the narrative and the story for your brand with one piece of content in the marketplace. And
Pepsi.
Exactly.
Pepsi.
Yeah.
On the negative.
It's on the negative.
Yeah.
We would say, just to echo David and X's point on Samsung, I just think we see that as a really interesting opportunity of brands who are collaborating in a way that's actually authentic to the core DNA of Samsung, but actually doing it in a way that's not crass. It's actually authentic and real, and you're telling a story that's adding value to the community, which I think with hashtag PowerUp there's some, for those of you that don't know, it's like a really incredible program. But to me, I think that's an example of a brand who is finding an opportunity for something that's happening in culture and actually flipping it to tell a brand story in a way that makes sense for them.
And I think being fluid as well. Like, we're always talking about the campaign, how it can change. There are always new ideas, and the response from David and the team is, okay, yeah, I like that. Let's keep on, let's move with that. Let's push that forward, as opposed to, oh no, we have a plan already. That doesn't fit the thing. Yeah, we know we're doing that thing. Let's only do that. You know what I mean? So I think there's a level of fluidity, and also there needs to be a level of just young kidness involved, just the corporate culture. You need to be able to still snicker at like a dirty joke, because your audience does. You know what I mean? And if your corporate culture is so tight that everyone's afraid to speak, then you end up going down a Pepsi road, or you go down, it's one of my favorite stories when I try to explain to people, Asifex. You ever heard of a product called Asifex?
It's a great name.
Exactly. So Asifex is spelled A-C, it's like an acid reflux thing. And I saw it on CNN. And it's literally like, gassy, right? And it's called Asifex. And no one, and think about you, like we're all corporate folks. You know how long the process is to get to CNN, to have your commercial on CNN. And it's doctors like, thanks to Asifex, my doctor told me to take Asifex. Asifex, 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 Asifex. The whole commercial. I'm looking at this like, what are they doing?
And no one pointed that out before.
No one pointed out, but the audience did. And so you might still be able to find it. Like, they've worked pretty hard to pull it all down. The last thing I found when I looked it up was like an article about the fact that these guys made an Asifex commercial. And all these kids, like, there's people making parodies of the thing. And like, so how many meetings where no one said, the name of the product is Asifex? And then the agency, and then the boards, and the pitching, and the choosing the boards, call directors phone calls, the process that it gets to get all the way to CNN, and either no one was childish enough to snicker at the name of the product, or too afraid to say it. And then you end up, and look, man, it's hard to come back from those kinds of missteps. Pepsi forever, every single protest, there's a guy walking around now with a Pepsi can, handing it to police officers.
But an interesting point about Asifex, I feel weird even saying it now, but is the audience pointed it out. And I think part of this whole being relevant is we've all realized, as marketers, as brands, as corporations, you have to listen to the audience in that process. And there's also that balance of, how do you involve them? How do you listen to them? We see now, I think, in all kinds of topics, like A&W taking straws out of their supply chain, right? Companies are listening to consumers, and they're responding right through to their product development, to the supply chain, maybe the branding, they should be thinking about that. But what's the process to do that in an agile way? Because it takes a long time to develop a campaign, and then to be able to pivot is hard to do. But how do you, even in the creative process, listen and tap into what the people are saying?
I personally trust it. I will, look, you all remember the video for Give Me the Light? Yeah? That treatment for that video and that video that actually came out are lawsuit level differences. Like, if anyone at Elektra Records ever said, hold on a second, or actually it's VP Records at the time, if they could have taken the treatment in the video and gone to a court of law and said they didn't do what they said they were going to do. Because at one point, as we're making it and talking about it, it just kind of hit me. Like, oh, we should just do this. And we pivoted and switched it. Same thing with Shay Shay Lagos. You remember the Shay Shay Lagos, Ghostface Killer? Anyone, some hip hop heads in here? Yeah, there you go. That was another one where the treatment for that video was Ghostface Killer as a private detective going to rescue a little girl that was kidnapped. The video was a hotel party. You know what I'm saying? But we never rewrote it. It never, I called Ghostface and said, yo, I want to do this now. He said, let's do it. Same with, we didn't call anybody for Give Me the Light. We just changed it. But like I'm saying, the ability to say that's a better idea and move on it, and let there be a creative process in your marketing, and what happens in the creative process, that a new idea comes that takes you in a new direction, and to go with that, as opposed to, again, If you get too rigid and you get too stuck, not only do you miss opportunities, but then on a team level, you start killing people's creativity. You start killing people's drive. If your young, excitable, creative executive runs in like, I got it, what if we did this? And you're like, well, you know, he's not gonna come or she's not gonna come kick in the door anymore. And eventually they're gonna start looking for places where that is the culture. You know what I mean? And they're gonna come snatch up your superstar that you never knew you had because you're so rigid about some idea way back when.
I was just going to say that we see a lot of brands right now embracing this idea called brand judo. And what's great about Twitter is it's literally like a pulse of what's happening right now. Like this week on Twitter, it's like exploding with so many different major global, news items and items breaking. And brands can choose, do they have a reason to play in those conversations? But brand judo is this concept of, and we're seeing brands listen and just use Twitter as a tool to listen to what's happening in the world, see what's going on, see what conversations are actually surging and actually mattering to people, and then using that and the momentum. You guys know judo, you take the momentum of your opponent and you use them and you flip it into something that's an advantage for you. The hypothesis of brand judo is, how does a brand do that? How do you listen for something that's happening in culture and use that and flip it into a brand story where it's appropriate? That is something that's super powerful. And Airbnb did this recently. It's a great example of, you remember the travel strike that Trump put in place a while back? He put in a travel ban. People couldn't travel into the United States from certain countries. That had massive impacts on Airbnb's business. They were seeing racial profiling in their renters. They were seeing discrimination happening. And they said, wait a second, traveling is what we're all about. We actually, as a brand, recognized, and this was a moment that was just blowing up on Twitter, they said, this is actually a moment for us to redefine who we are. We actually didn't create a place for you to rent your home to someone. We actually created trust amongst strangers. That's the power of our brand. So they used this cultural moment that was exploding in conversation, and they created a whole campaign called #WeAccept. They redefined their terms and conditions. They actually totally changed the narrative of their company about embracing the stranger, which was a super powerful moment that they didn't need to do, but they saw it was something that was moving in culture, and they actually took advantage of that moment. So that's something I think we're seeing a lot of brands listening for something happening in culture, finding if it fits with their DNA, and turning around a creative process in almost real time to take advantage of that moment.
Yeah, but it's important to make sure it matches. You don't want Kylie Jenner with a Pepsi can.
You don't like Pepsi.
I love Pepsi. But man, look.
And sorry, David, how do you feel? I mean, I think on the consumer level, we're just bombarded by so much information today, so many platforms. So you're right, you go to Twitter, what's happening now, you check your other platforms, you're getting there's so much happening around the world. And how, as a marketer, do you stand out amongst all of that if we're all kind of trying to do the same thing? And what role does creative play in that any longer?
Well, I mean, I think, a great strategy poorly executed is not a great strategy, right? So I think there's always going to be a role for, amazing execution. And I think, going back to your earlier questions, a little bit connected to this is, the way that you get through the clutter is by implementing a strategic process that looks at, which consumer at what part of their journey in the buying process and what message is the most effective. We call that connection planning, and it is largely data driven for us at Samsung. It's part of how we approach the market. So you have a structure that allows you to plan for your channel management, and then the other thing you do is, to your point, some moments you can plan, some moments you can plan what's likely, and then some moments you can't plan. And so how do you prepare yourself for those moments in time where you need those three kind of approaches to communication, because you're always going to have those.
And build agility into your process.
It's preparation and it's good brand hygiene, but that's ultimately kind of the approach that we take.
I was just going to say, this great, just to your question, this great Picasso quote is, learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. And that always spoke to me as a you got to use the platforms, you got to use these tools, you got to like get into it and use it yourself, not delegate it to someone. And I think for us, we've just seen brands who really kind of get to know the platform and find out how to break it in a way that's relevant for them. That's where you start to see real magic happen. And I think just on the creative process, I think to the bombardment of messages that people get every day, like remember, no one cares. No one gives a shit. So how do you actually wake up in the morning if you're a brand marketer and you have 6 seconds to capture someone's attention? You have to be relevant in the feed. You have to create content and design a narrative that actually makes sense for them in that moment. You have to take a risk. And the CMO of Wendy's actually said something that I thought was really smart. He said, everything we've ever done, and Wendy's is a brand that is amazing on Twitter, super provocative. They actually said that everything we've ever done that's actually blown up has always made us feel uncomfortable at first. So you have to be, I think, taken to a place where you feel really uncomfortable for it to actually be an idea that's worth pursuing. Mm-hmm. If you're not at that place, it almost feels like, should we even pursue it? Mm-hmm. So I think you got to almost be in that headspace as you venture down a creative path.
I say a lot that it should feel like you've gone to a house party with your friend and you don't know anybody, and your friend's gone off, so now you're just there. But the owner of the house shows up and he says, oh, hey, you're so-and-so's friend, here, have a beer and make yourself a home. We got food over there, and in the back there's a pool, just whatever you want to do, man, and leaves. And it should feel like that from a brand, where you say, oh, I'm welcome here, as opposed to here's a beer, now you have to have this conversation. Now you're obligated to be, you know what I mean? Like there's no, it's just like, here you go, have a good time, I'll talk to you later. Oh, I like it here, this guy's cool, this place is all right, I'm gonna have a good time. A lot of brands, I feel their advertising is the guy with the drink and the obligation. Now you have to, you know what I mean? Now you owe me something because I gave you something. You know,
and then you lose the authenticity of the message. So for me, it always really comes back to those things, you know. And I think the relationship is evolving. I think that a lot of us are starting to see the big corporations become less channelized. So there's less people to talk to. You know, for me personally, I don't enjoy working with large corporations because I just want to talk to the guy. I don't want to have to talk to the guy and then the girl, and we got to have a conference call, and then we got to do a meeting and that. So for me, like over time, I've just kind of like stepped completely back from the whole thing. If you want to do something cool, I love working with brands. I love being able to reach people, you know, and touch people in various ways. But when you are working in a collaborative space, right? If X and I were going to work on a project together as just pure creators, right? So creators first and then entrepreneurs after. We would work directly with each other. Obviously, there would be other people involved in the coordination of it because he would know his schedule and, oh, well, I have to be on a plane, or I have to do this or whatever. So there are other people that are involved handling the auxiliary aspects. But when it comes down to the actual nuts and bolts of it, it would be the two of us talking. Yeah. The challenge is that when you work with larger corporations and it's entrepreneur first and creative second, there's too many channels, you know, and there's this. So what happens is you start off with an initial thesis, and then that thesis changes, and as it should evolve. But it's not that it evolves; it changes so much as you go through the process because so many more people become involved, you know, and simple things become so far more complicated, and then at the end of it all, not only has the message changed, but the way that you initially envisioned communicating that message now has to change because you're saying, well, this is not what I want to talk about in the first place, so how we even end up here, you know? So I think that is changing a lot on the brand side. I think that the brands and the larger corporations are beginning to see that because you have people who are coming into these companies and saying, hey, you know, I really like what you are doing as a Samsung or as a Pepsi or as a Coca-Cola or name a duopoly, you know, a Twitter or Instagram or whatever it is, but how do we communicate with these people so that we can create a cohesive collaborative environment so that we can take advantage of their sphere of influence. Because to come back to what Paul was saying, okay, yeah, maybe nobody cares, but at the same time, it's like there are people who are listening to what X has to say because he has a voice. So how do we use his voice? How do we help him to grow his sphere of influence? And how do we help him? How do we benefit from that sphere of influence by doing things that are cohesive and intelligent, and not just here's a Pepsi, here's a cell phone, because that's not cohesive, and the conversation is changing. I think it's there's steps, but I think that we've actually gotten to a point now where people in the technological spaces, all of these people in the room are being seen as creatives, and people in the creative space are now understanding that there are technological tools and there's a whole world out there that's available to them, and they can kind of meet in the middle and do intelligent work.
And I think, we talked a lot about the opportunities with the moving at the pace of culture, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about just our obsession right now, I think, as a society about the pace, about FOMO. I mean, that's become a word in our vocabulary. And since this whole day has been about connecting to youth culture, I think we also know it's taking a toll on young people. It's taking a toll on all of us, too, in your work lives, the pace. And I found interesting today, there's one speaker talking about a meditation app that they had. I know you're very involved in meditation. You're launching, involved in that. And do you think this is, we're looking for a balance now, and we're looking to disconnect? And
yeah, I mean, we need it. What's happening with there's so much talk about meditation, so many different apps coming out, that mindfulness, that we're now walking into the understanding that you need to exercise your brain. And meditation is literally brain exercise. So I'm going to nerd out for a second. So meditation affects 3 parts of your brain. There's your prefrontal cortex, which is where decision making happens, behavior happens, long-term planning. Your amygdala, which is the part of the brain that regulates emotions, and your hippocampus, which is the part of the brain for learning and memory. And when you meditate, it gives volume to your prefrontal cortex, it gives volume to your hippocampus, and it shrinks your amygdala. Then there's stress. So both things need to be lined up, and this is really what Operation Prefrontal Cortex is about. Stress shrinks your prefrontal cortex. Stress enlarges your amygdala. And if it's constant stress, what can happen is that the hippocampus and the amygdala can hardwire in a fight or flight response, where you're constantly either fighting or running, which then begins to explain people that work in high stress situations, teachers, police officers, first responders, even more so when you think about interactions with police or interactions with that teacher. Remember that teacher in school? Right. These are high-stress jobs, and what Operation Prefrontal Cortex is also addressing is the violence in our society currently. Gun violence, mass violence. You have kids that live in high-stress neighborhoods or high-stress situations, and also that same damage happens from childhood abuse and neglect. So meditation directly reverses those things, right, when you do it enough. So as much as we all know now that you need to get outside and at least walk, now your phone will tell you, get up. Your watch will say, hey, you've been sitting for a while, time to walk around. These kinds of things. We now need to put that into our thinking of how the brain works. Because, again, for kids, they live in a high-stress world. They're like, we don't know, 10 years from now, if we don't get our act together, we really don't know what's going on, right? Like, scientists are predicting the end of human civilization. It's stressful for us. Imagine being 5, 6, 7, 8. You're going to be 18 for Mad Max. You know what I mean? That's
down.
Stressful, let alone, yeah. Listen, bro, I don't want to freak everybody out, but those zombie movies, it ain't going to be Walking Dead. It's going to be other functioning people looking to eat one another. I'm sorry, but yeah, when there's no food, people eat each other.
This is brought to you by Ass Effects.
Just some fun that we'll think about on the way home. But for a kid, that's high stress, let alone being on social media and it looks like everyone has, look, we all feel it and we're adults. You know what I mean? So all this stuff going on, meditation directly relates to that I encourage you all to begin your own meditative practice. And in about 8 weeks, you actually, they can look at the brain and see the difference. You know, so if you don't know how to, get on YouTube and search guided meditation. Find one that works for you, you listen to it, you do what it says. After a while, if you do it enough, you don't need to listen to the guided meditation anymore. You can just do it yourself. Real easy to do. Don't worry about clearing your mind. Don't worry about any of that stuff. Just take some time to go inward. And if you're religious and meditation seems a little bit outside of your box, there's a book called How God Changes the Brain. They did a 12-year study on people who pray and meditate. Contemplating God's love.
Very similar.
Very similar. The same, and this is the science backs it up. Contemplating God's love has the same benefits as meditation. And just a little caveat, praying to a judgmental, angry God is actually damaging to the brain. And it can change pathways in the brain and eventually how you perceive reality and how you, it's very damaging. If you pray to anger, it damages the brain. But praying to God is great, and praying to love is wonderful. So there's a way for you to do it that works for your life. YouTube is your friend. You know what I'm saying? How guided meditation, and really start this practice. It's as important as physical activity. We now need to think about mental activity and mental exercise.
Thank you. And on that note, we've hit our time limit. Thank you for the interesting conversation, all the great insights. Please join me in giving our panelists a warm round of applause.